How many guys out there can honestly say their wife has that kind of attention-grabbing presence? I'm not talking about fame or anything, but that magnetic energy that makes people take notice when she walks into a room. Men notice. That was Sophie. She didn't have a huge online following or a high-powered career, but she had this undeniable presence that people couldn't ignore wherever she went. You know the type. The one who makes heads turn without even trying. And trust me, I noticed. We got married in our mid-20s, and now we're nearing 40. We met in college. She was the bubbly, outgoing type who could light up any space she walked into. I, on the other hand, was the quieter, more reserved guy. Opposites attract, right? At first, everything was great, really great. We had that spark, then we got married, bought a house, had 2 beautiful daughters. It was your typical suburban dream. I worked a standard office job. 9 to 5, decent pay, benefits. The whole deal. Sophie stayed home most of the time, especially when the kids were younger. Occasionally, she'd take on part-time work, helping an elderly neighbor or picking up odd jobs when she felt like it. Our marriage? Well, it was fine. That's the best word for it. Fine. Nothing was wrong exactly, but nothing was amazing either. We weren't the type to be all over each other, but we weren't fighting either. We just kind of coexisted, raising the kids, paying bills, making life work. The intimacy? Still there, but let's face it, it wasn't like the early days. It had become routine, just like everything else. Looking back, I see how I ignored the signs. At first, they weren't obvious. Sophie started going out more, sometimes for groceries, sometimes to meet a friend for coffee, or even just for a walk. Nothing strange about that, except these little trips began stretching out longer. She'd return and casually mention she'd run into someone or that the line at the store was crazy. I didn't think much of it. After all, we'd been married for over a decade. I trusted her. She was a good wife, a great mom. Why would I question her? But over time, I started noticing things. There were more nights when she'd be out later than usual, more nights when she'd come home, and I'd ask how her day had been. Her response always felt rehearsed, like she'd already figured out exactly what to say. And then there were the phone calls. She was on her phone more, texting and smiling at her screen like a teenager. At first, I thought it was just her catching up with friends or planning a night out with other moms. But then, one night, when I leaned in to give her a quick goodnight kiss, she pulled away, saying she was too tired. That stung a little, but I brushed it off. People get tired. I was tired too. But the phone kept buzzing with more and more messages, especially in the evenings when we'd sit together on the couch. I'd be watching TV, and she'd be glued to that tiny screen of hers, her attention absorbed in whatever was on it. It wasn't the usual social media scroll, though. It was messages, texts. I started glancing over at her phone, just casually at first, trying to see who she was talking to. But every time I got too close, she'd quickly close her phone. That's when I felt the knot in my stomach begin to tighten. But I told myself, it's nothing. You're just being paranoid. I didn't realize how much of an idiot I was until one night. I woke up to find her talking on the phone, thinking I was still asleep. It was a low, whispered conversation. I couldn't catch much, but I heard enough. Enough to know it wasn't a call to her mom or a work friend. I can't right now. Are you still awake? Maybe tomorrow. I felt cold sweat forming on my forehead. I wanted to storm in and demand to know who she was talking to, but instead, I just stayed still, pretending to sleep, my mind racing. Could she be cheating? No, not Sophie. She wouldn't do that. Would she? The next morning, everything seemed normal. Or at least it looked that way. She was all smiles, getting the kids ready for school, giving me a kiss goodbye like nothing had happened. But something had shifted. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going on behind my back. I started paying closer attention, noticing every small detail, every tiny thing that seemed a little off. I began asking more questions, starting out subtle. Who were you talking to last night? Or where exactly did you go today? But she always had an answer, ready like she had rehearsed it. Oh, just a friend, or I went for a walk. Nothing special, but it was everything. And then one night it happened. I was cleaning up after dinner, and her phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the other room, so I grabbed her phone, intending to just hand it to her when she came back. But then I saw the name on the screen. It wasn't someone I recognized. It wasn't one of her friends or family. It was a man's name. My stomach dropped. and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see what the message was about. When I opened it, I found more than I'd bargained for. 40 messages full of inside jokes, winks, and emojis that didn't sit right. In that moment, everything shifted. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was having some kind of affair. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My hands shook as I set the phone back down, pretending nothing had happened as she came into the kitchen. I couldn't even look at her. It felt like I was living in some twisted version of my own life, one where I no longer knew what was real. The knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. I was stuck in this spiral of suspicion and confusion. Sure, I'd seen those texts, and yeah, they raised questions, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it was what it looked like. I kept telling myself that it couldn't be true. Maybe it was all a mistake. But that feeling in my gut only kept getting worse. A few days later, we were out running errands, picking up groceries like we did every other week. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I was pushing the cart, and Sophie had wandered off down one of the aisles. As I turned a corner, I caught sight of someone I hadn't seen in years, an old friend from college. Let's call him Jake. He was standing by the shelves, but there was something odd about the way he was acting. He seemed like he was trying to avoid being seen, darting behind a display, checking over his shoulder like he didn't want anyone to spot him. I figured I must be imagining things. Why would Jake be hiding in a grocery store? But curiosity got the best of me, so I ditched the cart and walked over to him. "Jake!" I called out. He looked startled, but when he saw me, he smiled. "Oh, hey man, long time no see." We exchanged some small talk, but something about him seemed off. He was way too upbeat, almost like he was putting on a show. I glanced around, trying to see if Sophie had noticed us, but she was still deep in another aisle, unaware of what was happening. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to make sense of his odd behavior. Yeah, I'm good," he said quickly, his eyes darting around like he was looking for an exit. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you." "About what?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not here," he muttered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "There's a bar near the strip mall, you know the one. Let's meet there later. We can talk." I didn't know what to make of it. Jake had always been the life of the party, the kind of guy who never acted skittish. Still, there was something in his voice, something urgent, that made me want to know what was going on. "All right," I said, though I wasn't exactly eager. "I'll meet you there tonight, after I get the kids to bed and tell Sophie I have some things to do." Later that night, I walked into the bar to find Jake sitting in a corner booth, a beer already in front of him. As soon as I saw him, I noticed a shift. He wasn't the same nervous guy I'd seen earlier. He was more confident now, more in control. The jittery energy from the store was gone. "Glad you could make it," he said, setting his drink down. "I've been thinking about you." "Thinking about me?" I chuckled, trying to ease the tension. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I remember how we used to hang out," he said, taking another sip of his beer. "And I want to help you." "Help me with what?" I leaned back in my seat, now completely confused. "I know things you don't," he said, giving me a look that made my stomach churn. "Listen, I'm not trying to make this weird, but there's something going on. Something you need to know about." I was hooked now. My stomach tightened as I waited for him to continue. He slid a business card across the table. I picked it up. It was for a local massage studio. "What's this about?" I asked, puzzled. "I've seen your wife there," he said, lowering his voice. "I thought you should know." "Yeah, she goes there sometimes," I said, trying to brush it off. "For facials, massages, just standard stuff." Jake shook his head. "No, man. She works there." I stared at him, confused. "What are you talking about? She doesn't even know how to give a massage. Why would she be working there?" Jake let out a long sigh, his eyes never leaving mine. "It's not that kind of massage, man. It's a different kind of place." I tried to process his words, but it didn't click right away. "What do you mean, different?" Jake shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable, but he didn't hesitate to explain. "It's a massage parlor, but not the regular kind. It's a place where women work, doing more than just giving massages. They get paid in cash for extra services." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're sure it was her?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded grimly. "Yeah, I saw her there. She's on a flexible schedule, shows up whenever she can." Jake wasn't just giving me his opinion. He was certain. He had seen her, and he'd asked around. There was no doubt in his mind. And as he said it, I could feel the walls closing in. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my hands had gone ice cold. I couldn't breathe. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was working in a place like that? Why? For money? Was that what all the little part-time jobs were really about? All the things she'd claimed were innocent? I felt like I was drowning in questions, but I had no answers. "I'm really sorry, man," Jake said, finishing his drink and standing up. "But you deserve to know." As I left the bar, I felt like I was in a daze, like my mind was disconnected from my body. I had no idea what to do with what I just learned. My wife, the mother of my kids, working in a place like that, all for money. How had everything gone so wrong? I couldn't process it. Jake's words kept running in circles in my mind, and nothing made sense. Part of me wanted to march right up to her and demand the truth, but then another part of me hesitated. What if Jake was wrong? What if there was a reasonable explanation for all of this? What if I confronted her and made a fool of myself? I couldn't take that chance. So, I made up my mind. I wouldn't say anything. Not yet. I needed to find out for myself. The next day, when Sophie went out for one of her usual errands, I stayed behind. The minutes felt like hours as I sat there, staring at the clock, trying to steady myself, trying to get my head on straight. But my thoughts were all over the place. After what felt like forever, I grabbed my keys and headed for the massage parlor that Jake had mentioned. When I stepped inside, everything appeared normal at first. The receptionist greeted me with a smile, treating me like just another customer. "Can I help you?" she asked, polite but detached. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little unsteady. "Is anyone available for a massage?" She checked the schedule and nodded. "We have a slot open. You can come on in and lie down. Someone will be with you shortly." My heart was pounding as she led me to a dim room. The soft hum of spa music played in the background, and the scent of lavender filled the air. I took off my shirt and stood there for a second, not entirely sure of what I was doing. I hesitated for just a moment, but then I undressed fully and lay down on the massage table, face down. What had I just walked into? A few minutes later, the door opened, and a woman stepped in. But she wasn't what I had expected. She was older, probably in her late 50s or early 60s. She didn't speak immediately, but just started rubbing oil onto my back, working it into my muscles in the way I expected a regular massage to feel. I was relieved. It seemed normal. After a few minutes, she spoke. "So, what kind of massage are you looking for today?" she asked casually. "We've got therapeutic, relaxing, or maybe you're after something a little different." I froze. This was exactly what Jake had warned me about. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to play it cool, clearing my throat and forcing out a nonchalant reply. "Yeah, maybe something more." Without a word, she stopped and walked out of the room. My heart raced. There was no turning back now. A few minutes later, the door opened again, but this time, it wasn't the older woman. A younger woman walked in, probably in her late 20s, wearing tight leggings and a tank top. She smiled knowingly, and without a word, began the massage. But this wasn't the same as before. Her touch was softer, slower, more deliberate. The air in the room felt different, charged somehow. I won't go into the details, but it didn't take long to realize that this wasn't just a regular massage. It ended exactly how I had feared. And to my surprise, I didn't stop it. I let it happen. I went along with it. And as it happened, I couldn't deny that it felt good. Too good. When it was over, I dressed in silence. I handed the woman a tip, more generous than I had intended, and walked out the door like everything was fine. But I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The guilt hit me like a freight train as I stepped outside. I had just done exactly what I feared my wife might be doing. I had crossed that line, and I didn't even know the truth. If Jake had been wrong, if Sophie wasn't involved in this place at all, then I had just destroyed everything, for nothing. I couldn't think clearly. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. What had I just done? And what the hell was I supposed to do next? When I got home, everything was quiet. Sophie hadn't returned yet, and the kids were still at school. I sat down at the kitchen table, trying to wrap my mind around everything. My hands were shaking as I replayed the events over and over again. Was this what Sophie was doing behind my back? Or had I let my paranoia push me into something I shouldn't have done? Either way, One thing was certain, I wasn't innocent anymore. I sat there in the dark, the quiet stretching on, my heart pounding in my chest. I had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways, but now that it was happening, it didn't feel right. My fingers tapped anxiously against my knee, the silence getting heavier with each passing second. I couldn't believe I was sitting here, questioning everything. The massage parlor, her special place. Or so it seemed. Over the past 24 hours, I had been through a whirlwind of emotions, so many that I barely knew which way was up. Anger, betrayal, and now, as I waited for her to walk through that door, I felt a bitter anticipation, a pit in my stomach that refused to go away. Last night had been a revelation, one I wasn't ready for. I waited until Sophie had fallen into a deep sleep, her breathing soft and steady beside me. Then I did it. I went through her phone. I know some people might think that was a violation of privacy, crossing a line, but after everything I'd seen, after what Jake had told me, I didn't care anymore. I needed answers. I had to know what was really going on. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. At first, I came across the ones about the massage parlor. It hit me like a punch to the gut. The appointments, the shifts, the VIP clients. But it wasn't just about work. No, these messages were explicit. They weren't about deep tissue massages or any of the normal things she'd always claimed. They were about keeping the clients happy, giving them exactly what they paid for. I felt sick to my stomach, reading her words, seeing her talk about herself like she was a commodity, like she could be bought and sold. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was what I found next, the messages from him. Chris. At first, I didn't know who he was, just another name in her phone. But as I kept scrolling through their conversations, it became painfully clear. He wasn't just a client. He was more than that. There was tenderness in their texts, not just about logistics, but affection. They were talking late at night, joking, flirting. I could feel the weight of each word, the pit in my stomach growing deeper with each line I read. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't just a job to Sophie. She had real feelings for him. This was emotional. And I wanted to throw her phone across the room. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I didn't. I kept my cool. I knew if I acted now, if I blew up, I wouldn't get the whole truth. And part of me, some small part, still couldn't fully accept it. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. I needed to see it for myself. So here I was, at the massage parlor, waiting to see if Sophie, or as they called her here, Sabrina, would walk through that door. The minutes dragged on like hours, each second crawling by. Finally, the door creaked open, and she stepped inside. Her eyes were down, probably expecting another client. She hadn't seen me yet. When she finally looked up, our eyes met. She froze, her face drained of color, and I could see the panic in her eyes as she realized who was sitting there. Not some random guy looking for a special massage. "W, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't move. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, I spoke, my voice low but steady, though the anger was simmering just beneath the surface. "You tell me," I said coldly. "Or should I call you Sabrina now?" She blinked, mouth opening and closing, trying to find the right words. But nothing came out. She was cornered. We both knew it. There was no way out of this now. "We need to talk about this," she finally managed, her voice trembling. "Talk," I scoffed, rising from the massage table. "About what?" "About how you've been lying to me for God knows how long. About how you've been sneaking around behind my back, working in a place like this with clients." I practically spat the last word out, my voice rising with each sentence. She took a step forward, holding her hands out like she was trying to calm me down. "It's not what you think," she started. "I wasn't having any of it." "Now what?" I shot back, stepping closer. "I know exactly what this is, Sophie. I've seen the messages. I know what you do here. VIP clients, special massages. What the hell is going on with you?" Her face twisted in pain, realizing just how much I knew. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. "I didn't want it to happen this way." I let out a bitter laugh. "Tell me? You were going to tell me when? After another night of lying to me? After another shift here, pretending you're out running errands?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. You know what? It's not just about the money, is it? It's not just the work. It's him. Who's Chris, Sophie? Or should I say, Sabrina? She flinched at the name, her face crumpling. It's not what you think, she whispered, her voice cracking. Bullshit. I shot back, my voice cold and unrecognizable even to myself. You've been talking to him. I read the texts. You're in love with this guy, aren't you? You've been screwing around behind my back with him. She shook her head, the tears streaming down her face now. No, I swear it's not like that. It's complicated. I don't want to hear any more, I said, my voice like ice. The anger inside me was boiling over, and there was no stopping it. Complicated? I roared, my voice shaking with rage. No, Sophie, it's not complicated. You've been lying to me. You've been cheating on me emotionally, physically. Hell, I don't even know anymore. And for what? For some guy you met in a sleazy place? She was sobbing now, but I couldn't care less. I had said everything I needed to say, and I wasn't going to hold back anymore. Without another word, I turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. But as I walked out of that place, my chest still burning with fury, I knew I wasn't done. There was more I needed to do. Something final. I couldn't just leave it like this. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I was seething from the argument with Sophie. The betrayal, the lies, the constant deception. My mind was racing, my blood still boiling. I wasn't just going to walk away from this. No, I wanted more than just the truth. I wanted consequences, for her, yes, but for everyone involved in this disgusting operation. I was going to make sure this place paid for everything it had done. As I stormed down the hall, something caught my eye. A fire alarm button, sitting innocently on the wall, like fate had put it there just for me. Offer me a perfect distraction. I glanced around, no one was watching. The receptionist had disappeared somewhere in the back of the building, probably handling another VIP client. Without thinking twice, I pressed the fire alarm. The building erupted into chaos. The alarm blared loudly, the piercing sound rattling the walls. In a matter of seconds, I saw the receptionist rushing toward the back, shouting something about evacuating. Perfect. They'd be too distracted to notice what I was about to do. I made my way straight to the front desk, where an open laptop sat. It didn't take long for me to get to work. I sat down and started searching, my fingers flying over the keys, my heart pounding harder than it had all day. This wasn't just about Sophie anymore. This was about taking down everything, exposing all of it. I wasn't going to let this place hide in the shadows anymore. After a few minutes of digging, I found exactly what I was looking for, the customer data. It was tucked away in a folder labeled Innocently Enough, Client Records. I opened it, and what I saw made my stomach churn. Names, phone numbers, appointments. It was all there, neatly organized, like this place was a business running above board. But these weren't just random people coming in for massages. These were powerful men, influential people. I could barely believe my eyes. I quickly took out my phone and snapped pictures of the screen, making sure to capture every detail. It only took a few moments, but it felt like a lifetime. Just as I was about to close the laptop, another folder caught my eye, this one labeled Staff. My heart skipped. I opened it, and inside I found a goldmine, employee records, photos, schedules. Every woman who worked there, including Sabrina. I snapped pictures of those files too. If this place was going down, I wasn't going to leave anyone out. I was taking it all down. I slipped out of the building, blending in with the crowd that was being evacuated due to the fire alarm. The chaos worked in my favor. No one looked twice at me. No one had any reason to suspect that I'd done anything other than follow the crowd. But I had what I needed, and I was about to set everything in motion. Later that evening, after I had calmed down, I knew exactly who to contact. There was a journalist I knew, an old friend who had a nose for stories like this. Scandals involving the rich and powerful. He had taken down some big names before, and I knew he'd be all over this. I sent him a brief message, clear but to the point. I've got something you'll want to see. It's big. Call me. When he called, I laid it all out for him. I didn't mention Sophie. That part was personal, and I wanted to keep it that way. But I told him everything I knew about the massage parlor, the VIP clients, the hidden services, everything. And I gave him the data I'd stolen. I told him to hold off for now, but once the police raided the place, I wanted it all out in the open. Names, details, everything. He was silent for a moment, then replied, "This is going to make a lot of people very unhappy, but I'll do it." "Good," I said, hanging up the phone. The next step was easy. I dialed the police, keeping my voice low, disguising it as best as I could. I gave them an anonymous tip and told them everything: the location, the illegal activities, the VIP clientele, and even hinted at how deep this thing could go. But I didn't mention Sophie by name. This wasn't just about her. This was bigger than her now. It only took 15 minutes for the police to show up. I watched from a distance as squad cars rolled in, lights flashing. Officers spilled out and headed straight for the front door. It was chaos all over again. But this time, it wasn't a drill. This time, it was real. The next few days were a blur. The story spread like wildfire, all thanks to my journalist friend. Once the raid was confirmed, he went to work, publishing everything. Within hours, the place was exposed for what it really was: a front for prostitution, catering to powerful clients who thought they could buy their way out of anything. But this time they couldn't. The client list was made public, and the fallout came fast. Politicians, businessmen, even a few familiar local names were dragged through the mud. It was impossible to ignore. Within days, the owners of the operation were arrested. The police uncovered everything: the hidden records, payments that never made it to the books, the secret services that had been running for years. The whole thing was ripped apart. The people who ran it were arrested and thrown in jail. I should have felt relief. I had gotten what I wanted. The place that had wrecked my life was gone, and everyone involved was paying the price. But as I sat there scrolling through my phone, reading about the raid and the arrests, I realized there was no satisfaction in it. Sophie, or Sabrina, as the world now knew her, had been part of that world. No matter how much chaos I had caused, no matter how many people I had exposed, the fact remained that my life, our life, would never be the same. The fallout from everything that happened was swift. Once the story broke, there was no escaping it. No way for Sophie to hide from the truth. The client list, the police raid, everything. It was all out in the open. It wasn't just a local story anymore. It spread like wildfire. People I hadn't talked to in years were reaching out, asking if the rumors were true, asking if my wife had been involved. At first, I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to tell anyone. It felt too personal, too painful. But the truth had already slipped out, and trying to hide from it only made it worse. Neighbors, old friends, even co-workers, they all found out. Some through the news, others through gossip. Her name didn't appear directly in the headlines, but the rumors followed fast. People were talking. Our mutual friends, the ones who had been closest to us for years, started cutting her off one by one. Some were genuinely shocked, asking if it was true. But others? Well, they didn't hesitate to condemn her, even without knowing the full story. Maybe it was disgust. Maybe it was fear of being associated with such a public scandal. Either way, Sophie became a pariah, and I could see the weight of it wearing her down. As for me, I felt numb. The divorce was quicker than I expected. Maybe because there was no way to save face after everything came to light, or maybe because we both knew there was nothing left to save. Either way, we didn't argue over the details. We both knew there was no point. Sophie tried, at first, to explain, to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't need her reasons. I had already made up my mind. The betrayal was too deep for me to care about her explanation. We finalized the divorce quickly, and to me, that was the end of it. I didn't want to look back, didn't want to focus on what had happened or what I had done in return. The revenge, the exposure, it gave me some satisfaction, sure, but it didn't undo anything. It didn't take away the sting of the betrayal. After the divorce was finalized, I made a choice. I was done. I threw myself into work, kept busy, tried to rebuild. I didn't want to be the guy defined by a failed marriage. I had too much ahead of me to stay stuck. Slowly, things started to get better. It wasn't all at once, but eventually I started to feel the weight lifting. I reconnected with old friends, started going out more. I focused on being there for my kids. They were my priority. I wanted them to know that no matter what had happened, I would always be there for them. Life started to feel a little lighter, a little easier. I wasn't waiting for the next bomb to drop. I didn't look over my shoulder anymore. I had faced the worst and come out on the other side. People asked how I was doing, expecting bitterness or anger, but I wasn't angry. I was okay. In fact, I was better than okay. I had made it through, and I was moving forward. As for Sophie, I don't know where she is now, and honestly, I don't care. We don't talk, and I don't think we ever will again. I've heard bits and pieces from mutual acquaintances. Apparently, she's trying to rebuild somewhere else. But it's hard to shake a reputation like hers. She lost a lot, and I doubt her reputation will ever recover. But that's her burden to bear, not mine. As for me, I'm doing well. I've got a new routine, new goals, and new perspective. I'm not angry anymore. I don't dwell on what happened. I let it go. To anyone out there wondering if things ever get better after something like this, they do. It takes time, but it happens. And to the people who stood by me, who didn't walk away when everything got messy, thank you. I owe you more than I can say. To the rest, life moves on, and so do I. Good luck.